Is that the sound of respect? Or just the flag rope clicking against a diner pole at dawn? The jukebox hums silver light sliding across coffee cups as two young mechanics scoff. It's just a coin, one mutters, and the old man doesn't answer. The coin rolls once, catching the morning light, and for a heartbeat, the room goes silent. Every face reflected in that trembling shine. Still the proof stays on the counter waiting, because quiet men leave echoes too. Morning light slid through the fogged glass of the Trenton Field diner, spilling soft gold across chrome stools and the smell of burnt toast. The jukebox hummed an old Patsy Cline tune that no one had the heart to change. Frank Holloway sat at his usual corner stool, shoulders square, cap clean, but faded at the brim. The waitress, May Dalton, filled his cup without asking. "Morning, Frank." "Same as yesterday." He nodded. "If it ain't broke, don't tune it." She smiled at that, the kind of easy grin small towns keep for people they've seen through 3 generations of winters. At the far end of the counter, 2 young mechanics from the airfield whispered, not cruel exactly, just careless. One tilted his head toward Frank's hand. "You ever notice that old guy drops a coin every time he sits down?" The other chuckled. "Maybe it's his tip for the ghosts." May shot them a look soft but warning. "Watch your mouths." Frank pretended not to hear. He reached into his pocket, thumbed the Air Force coin, its edges smooth from years of keeping. He placed it on the counter beside the napkin dispenser, quietly, like setting down a piece of memory. The coin caught the light. For an instant, the reflection of the flag outside flickered across its surface, red, white, and a tired blue. May wiped the counter near him, voice low. "You still heading to the museum later?" "Maybe," he said. "They got new glass in those cases. Figure I'll check the seams. That coin of yours," she said carefully. "It got a story," he shrugged. "All old metal's got one. Most folks don't listen long enough." The 2 young men laughed again, trying to keep it under their breath. "It's just a coin," one muttered. Frank lifted his coffee, the steam tracing faint lines in the light. "Reckon so," he said, not turning. May wanted to say more to defend him properly, but Frank's quiet made her stop. The diner filled with the rhythm of forks and low conversation, the kind of background noise that lets dignity hide in plain sight. Silent beat. The coin rolled a slow, accidental spin across the counter. It clicked once, twice, then stilled, the flag's reflection trembling on its face. One of the boys glanced up, uneasy now. May reached for the coin, meaning to hand it back, but Frank gently pushed it toward her with 2 fingers. "Leave it," he said. "You'll forget it again." He smiled faintly. "Doubt it. Some things remember you instead." Outside, a freight truck passed, shaking the windows. The jukebox skipped, caught itself, and found the tune again. Frank finished his coffee, left $1 under the cup, and stood. The air smelled of rain starting somewhere beyond the hangars. He adjusted his cap and nodded to May. "You keep that coin safe for me." She looked down at it, winged insignia glinting beneath the diner lights. And when she looked up, he was already pushing through the door into the fog. The bell above it chimed once, lonely and clean. Still, he left it there. The morning after the diner felt quieter than it should. Frank Holloway crossed the parking lot of the Trenton Field Museum toolbox, swinging from his hand. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and autumn rain, the kind of scent that settled in his bones even after decades away from the flight line. Inside, the echo of his boots followed him past exhibits he'd helped restore: a rusted propeller, a torn flag sealed behind glass, a wall of names. Near the new display case, a printed notice was taped to the barrier in block letters: Veterans Day, ceremony staff only. No unauthorized access. He read it once, nodded once, and reached for his screwdriver. The reflection of the sign shimmered on the glass he was tightening. May had stopped by earlier, leaving his coffee and the coin wrapped in a napkin. "You left this," she'd said, smiling. He hadn't taken it back. "Maybe it'll look better under glass," he'd replied. Now the coin rested in her apron pocket, and somehow that felt right. As Frank polished the display's edge, Mark Kessler, the city coordinator, stepped into the room, a man whose shoes always sounded official before his words did. "Mr. Holloway, we appreciate your help, but the hall's reserved today. Liability issues, you understand." Frank nodded, voice even. "Just sealing the corners, sir. Regulations say no unlisted personnel during rehearsal." He could have argued. He didn't. He wiped the last smudge from the glass and straightened. The reflection caught him faint and colorless, a man built for work, not ceremony. He was pinned by protocol, May would later say when she told the story, and it was true in the quietest way. No one pushed him out. The rules simply closed around him like slow weather. Outside, the sky broke open in short silver rain. Frank ducked under the awning of the post office across the street. Inside, the line moved at the pace of dust. Eli, his grandson, stood near the counter in a crisp ROTC jacket, sorting a stack of envelopes. When he saw Frank, his eyes lit. "Grandpa, you heading to the ceremony? I can save you a seat." Frank shook his head. "Got more screws than speeches today." Eli frowned. "You should wear your patch at least. People forget unless they see something shining." Frank smiled, a small curve that carried both pride and fatigue. "Guess shine looks better on planes than people." Eli laughed softly. "You always say that. 'Cause it's still true." The clerk called Eli's number. He gave Frank a quick salute before stepping away. Frank returned it not out of rule but habit, then pulled his collar up against the wind. Through the window he could see the museum across the street, its doors already closing for the private rehearsal. The sign fluttered once in the breeze before sticking back to the glass. He stood there a moment longer, watching his own reflection blur in the wet surface of the post office window. But he kept working. The lunch crowd at Trenton Field Diner came and went like the tired farmers' teachers, a few airfield workers grabbing coffee before the rain came down again. May Dalton wiped down the counter, humming under her breath. Frank's seat at the corner was empty, but the coin he'd left behind still sat there, catching bits of light every time the door opened. She turned it over in her palm. The back wasn't smooth like she'd thought. It carried a faint engraving, two wings folded around a number 614th maintenance. Beneath it the words, "Service before self." May smiled softly. "Guess that's one story you don't tell over breakfast." She slipped the coin into a napkin, the same one she'd written his bill on. The receipt was still warm from the coffee cup that had sat over it. On a whim she scribbled, "Frank Holloway, paid in full," and tucked both into the drawer under the register. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the glass door, and the bell chimed sharp. A pair of local truckers came in dripping rain. "Hey, where's the old fella with the patch cap?" one asked. "Thought he was welded to that stool." May grinned, topping off their mugs. "Probably tightening bolts at the museum. Can't keep him still long." "Guess he earned the right," the man said. "Heard he once saved half a crew out near right field." "Is that so?" Buddy of mine swore it. "Plane came down rough in '79, maintenance guys stuck under the wing. Said some old sergeant held the beam long enough for the others to crawl out." May laughed softly. "That sounds like him. Quiet as a church pew, but built like one too." The other driver took a sip. "He never talks about it." "Not once," May said. "He just leaves tips shaped like memories." They chuckled, and May tossed her towel over her shoulder. Next cups on the Air Force. Silent beat, the steam from the coffee curled around the counter, wrapping the coin's soft glow like a thin mist of breath. For a heartbeat, the engraved wings seemed to tremble alive again under the fluorescent hum. May thought of the inscription, "Service before self," and felt something settle in her chest, a quiet kind of respect that didn't need an audience. She opened the drawer, looked at the receipt she'd signed, and added a small heart beside his name before closing it again. When the last of the truckers left, she wiped the counter one more time, slower now. Outside, the flag over the diner snapped in the wind, sharp and proud against the gray sky. Then the phone rang, just the one in the back room that almost never did. May turned, startled, still holding the damp towel. A sudden draft from the open door lifted the paper slip she'd left by the register. Then the receipt fluttered from her hand. The Trenton Town Hall smelled faintly of floor polish and new paint. Every Veterans Day, it tried too hard to look solemn. Folding chairs filled the chamber, the kind that creak when people try to sit still. At the front, a podium waited beneath a banner that read, "Honoring Service by the Book." Frank Holloway stood in the back, cap in hand. He hadn't planned to come, but May had insisted. "Just listen," she'd said, handing him his invitation like it was a ticket to something he'd already earned. Mark Kessler stepped to the microphone posture, exact voice full of careful pride. "Today we recognize those who served with honor and followed every protocol that keeps our nation safe." Frank felt the words land heavy: protocol, procedure, permission. Each syllable sounded like a lock turning. At the edge of the stage, May Dalton stood clutching a small cloth. Inside it lay the coin and the coffee receipt, edges warm from her palm. She caught Frank's eye, nodded once, and walked up the steps. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly to General Howard Reeve, who was adjusting his medals before being introduced. "You might want to see this." Reeve frowned politely, then opened the cloth. The coin slid into his hand, light, striking its worn engraving. For a second, the reflection of the hall's flag shimmered across his face. His thumb brushed the raised wings, 614th Maintenance, and something changed in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" May held out the crumpled receipt. "He left it at the diner. Said you'd know." Reeve looked toward the back of the hall. His gaze found Frank among the last row of chairs, standing quiet and still. The murmur in the room dimmed as the general walked to the microphone, the coin glinting between his fingers. "This piece," he said, voice lower now, "belonged to a man from my unit. 614th Maintenance. In '79, when a C-130 went down, he stayed behind to hold the wing so 4 of us could crawl clear." A hush spread through the crowd, the kind that erases even the sound of breathing. Kessler shifted uncomfortably, the speech in his hands trembling. Reeve continued, "They told me later his hands were burned, but he never filed a report. Said the paperwork would just slow us down." He looked straight at Frank. "Mr. Holloway, sir, thank you never seemed enough." Frank cleared his throat. "It's just a coin," he said gently. Reeve shook his head. "No. It's proof." Silent beat, the laughter stopped first. Then the general froze, coin held mid-air as the light pooled around it. Someone in the crowd started to stand. Others followed without being told. It wasn't a salute, just people rising, because sitting suddenly felt wrong. Kessler lowered his notes, realizing the ceremony had already happened, and not by his hand. May blinked back, tears whispering to herself. He was slammed by procedure, not anger. The general set the coin on the podium, its reflection trembling under the hall lights. "Some honors," he said quietly. "Don't wait for ceremony." No applause followed, only the faint hum of the air vent, and the soft click of the flag's rope outside the window. The Trenton Field Museum smelled of fresh paint and polished brass that morning. Workers had cleared the center aisle for a new display, a single glass case lit by a narrow cone of light. The plaque beneath it read, "In Quiet Service, Frank Holloway, 6th 14th Maintenance Wing." Frank stood beside it, his cap tucked under one arm. General Reeve had insisted on coming himself, though Frank kept saying it wasn't necessary. "I didn't save anyone," he muttered, voice low. "Just did what needed doing." Reeve smiled. "That's exactly what saving looks like to most of us." At the far end of the hall, Eli balanced a small screwdriver between his fingers, squinting, as he tightened the frame on the new mount for the coin. The engraved wings caught the light, the number 604th glowing faintly under the new fixture. May arrived carrying a thermos of coffee and a stack of paper cups. "Town says this makes it official," she said, handing one to Frank. "I say it just makes it warmer." He chuckled softly. "Smells like the diner in here now." "Then it's finally perfect," May replied. Silent beat, they worked quietly, the sounds of tools and careful breathing filling the space. When Eli stepped back, the light above the coin brightened automatically, timed for the morning sun. Reeve cleared his throat. "Would you do the honors?" Sergeant Frank hesitated, then reached out, not in ceremony, but in habit, and adjusted the small plaque until it sat perfectly straight. The hall lights reflected in the glass, the coin resting still beneath them. Behind him, a small crowd had gathered. Town staff, a few veterans from the local post, and even the 2 truckers from the diner. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Kessler stood near the doorway, hat in hand, face red but thoughtful. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "for what it's worth, I'm sorry about that notice." Frank gave a small nod. "Protocol's just paper, son. It doesn't change the work." Reeve turned toward the display. "You know," he said quietly, "we had awards for courage, valor, leadership. Never one for quiet steadiness. Maybe we should have." May poured another cup and handed it to him. "You can still start with this," she said. The general smiled, holding the coffee under the soft museum lights. "Then that's my first medal of the day." Eli looked at his grandfather, eyes bright. "They'll tell your story now." Frank shook his head. "Stories fade. Light lasts longer." For a long while, no one moved. The reflections from the glass played across the ceiling like slow water. Then May whispered almost to herself, "Still." The coin shone steady. No applause followed, only the hum of the lights, the faint clink of a wrench on tile, and the sound of coffee being poured. It was enough. The museum opened late on Sundays, but Eli Holloway arrived before dawn. The parking lot shimmered faintly under a thin film of dew, the kind of stillness that made the world seem paused between breaths. He carried a folded note and his grandfather's old Air Force cap, the one with the frayed stitching along the brim. Inside the hall, lights were dimmed to half the air, cool and humming softly through the vents. The display case stood alone in the center, its small brass plaque gleaming under the first thread of morning light. The coin rested where Frank had left it, steady, simple, unguarded. Eli stopped a few steps away. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice, that easy mix of humor and modesty. "Guess shine looks better on planes than people." He smiled faintly and placed the folded paper beside the plaque. The handwriting on it was neat but unsure, each word pressed with care. Some proofs shine only in silence. Silent beat, the words seemed to hum under the glass, catching the light that filtered through the museum's skylight. It painted the floor in soft gold, like a sunrise that belonged only to the quiet. Eli took off the cap and set it gently beside the note. For a moment, his reflection merged with the displays, his face hovering above the coin and his grandfather's engraved wings. Behind him, footsteps echoed lightly. May Dalton entered carrying a small tray of coffee cups, her smile already warmed by the morning. Couldn't sleep either, Eli shook his head. Didn't want him to start the day alone. May stepped beside him, watching the light move across the glass. He never really will. Folks stop by here every morning now. Sometimes they just stand quiet. Sometimes they touch the glass. Eli nodded. That sounds like him. From the far side of the hall, General Reeve appeared, still in his civilian jacket hat, tucked respectfully under one arm. He said nothing, just paused beside the display and bowed his head once. The three of them stood there in a triangle of soft light, bound not by ceremony, but by memory. Art moment number 3. Legacy closure. Eli reached forward and pressed his fingertips lightly to the glass. The light bounced upward, washing across his face, and the coin at once 2 generations joined by a single reflection. He whispered, "Maybe it was never just a coin." The air held still for a breath, then the light shifted as the sun cleared the window. The coin glimmered, once bright alive, and then settled again, quiet as it had always been. May exhaled, eyes damp but smiling. He'd say it's just maintenance. Eli laughed softly, that same easy grin his grandfather used to wear. Then it's the kind that lasts. They stepped back as the museum lights brightened fully, welcoming the day. If this story moved you, share it forward. The museum stayed quiet long after visitors left, the air still carrying the faint smell of coffee and polished glass. Beneath the soft overhead light, the coin glimmered steady, its reflection touching the brim of an old Air Force cap, resting where Eli had placed it that morning. Outside, the town's flag moved gently in the wind, and for a brief moment, the light through the window made the coin shine like a lamp in winter, small but unflinching. May, Reeve, and Eli stood together near the door, saying nothing. Silence did the speaking better. Still, the proof remained. Under the glass, the handwritten note caught the glow. Some proofs shine only in silence. Maybe it was never just a coin.